There are a lot of nice things that can be said about Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, but in case you're pressed for time, I'm going to start with one that sounds particularly exaggerated, even though it's not. Knights of the Old Republic really is one of the best things to happen to Star Wars in many years. It's arguably just a better Star Wars property than the two most recent theatrical films, and really it's just a fantastic role-playing game all around. It's developed by BioWare, a company that's already known for developing great role-playing games, although its previous RPGs have all been set in the world of Dungeons & Dragons, Forgotten Realms, that sort of thing. So this is definitely a change of scenery, but not necessarily a complete change of pace for the Canadian developer, which is definitely in top form here. Knights of the Old Republic is by all means a very true role-playing game. One of the most remarkable things about it is in how it lets you play as pretty much whichever type of character you can imagine, whether very good or very evil or various shades in between. Character interaction is very, very engaging in this game. You're constantly being charged with making important and meaningful decisions. So you're not relegated to the role of a spectator as you are in most console RPGs. Knights of the Old Republic actually takes place thousands of years even before Episode 1. Although you wouldn't know it just from playing the game, it seems that the Star Wars universe doesn't really change much over the course of millennia. So you'll see some kind of old-style weapons. Some characters fight with swords and things like that as opposed to lightsabers. But generally, you'll see a lot of very familiar types of Star Wars stuff. You'll talk to Jabba the Hutt type guys and kind of negotiate bounty hunting deals, and you'll meet up with a bunch of Twi'leks, who are the guys with the big tentacles on their heads, and Rhodians like Greedo, and basically a lot of familiar Star Wars sights and sounds are in this game, and the game does a very good job at being consistent with the films and presenting this stuff. Alien creatures even speak in their kind of native alien languages and sound much like they do in the movies, and these sorts of things really help give the game the feel of Star Wars as opposed to some generic science fiction game. This is by all means an adventure of epic proportions. It starts off pretty simple. You barely manage to escape from a ship that's come under attack by the Sith, and you crash land on a Sith quarantined planet, and your first order of business is just trying to find a means of escape from this planet that's kind of in the Sith's stranglehold. You're part of the Republic. You're trying to overthrow this force that's been encroaching on Republic space, and trying to figure out how the Sith have managed to get this huge fleet of starships seemingly out of nowhere. What's their big dark secret? Once you find a way off the starting planet, then the game really opens up, and soon enough you'll have this big quest that sends you to numerous different Star Wars worlds. You'll go everywhere from Tatooine, the desert planet, to Kashyyyk, the kind of woodsy homeland of the Wookiees, and a bunch of places in between, looking for these certain ancient artifacts and meeting new people along the way. You'll gain up to 9 party members who will join you. You can travel with up to 2 of them at any given time, and each of these characters has his or her own or its own story, and you can travel with these characters as you see fit. There's just a lot to see and do in this game. You'll find characters, requesting that you resolve disputes for them. You'll get to take sides in conflicts, and then find a cure to a deadly disease, and basically settle a whole bunch of different situations, or just intervene in situations where you might be able to help out or hinder. And really, that's the big thing about Knights of the Old Republic. You can choose to be good or evil, and when you eventually become a Jedi, and that's really not much of a spoiler. It's pretty obvious that you gain force powers at some point in the game. Sure enough, you're constantly faced with being able to use your force powers for good or for evil. In dialogue, you pretty much always have choices that either will be morally good or evil, and your character will gain affinity toward the light side or the dark side of the force as you do these things. You couldn't tell at a glance, but Knights of the Old Republic actually plays very similarly to last year's Neverwinter Nights. The key difference is mostly superficial. Instead of having the isometric perspective of BioWare's previous RPGs, instead this game looks like a third-person action-adventure. The camera follows the main character around. Combat also looks very dynamic. You'll see characters kind of dodging each other and performing a variety of different attack moves, but that doesn't mean you have a direct involvement in the action. In fact, you don't. Really what's going on is that there's a system very similar to 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons at work here. So, whether or not you hit an opponent is determined by a to-hit roll and various bonuses depending on your character's level and things like that. It's pretty much all automated and statistical and somewhat strategic. You could have up to 3 characters in your party in battle, your job in the fight is just to make sure everyone's staying alive, so you can use your healing kits and stuff like that if someone's injured. But generally, your party members will do their own thing just fine and will attack all nearby opponents. And you can sit back and watch what happens, or take a more active role and pause at any time and issue orders, things like that. So the combat is just one part of Knights of the Old Republic, and it's handled pretty well. It looks impressive, especially the lightsaber duels. And the 3rd edition style D&D rules actually do a pretty good job of making this feel like Star Wars. Basically, Jedi characters seem really, really powerful in the game. They can deflect blaster bolts with their lightsabers and can chop people up real good, and they basically use their powers to defeat very large parties of enemy characters, stuff like that. The combat is a pretty major part of the game. Even if you play as a character who tries to talk his way out of situations, you'll still invariably get into some pretty big fights. But the combat is entertaining to watch, entertaining to be a part of, and is handled quite well. Knights of the Old Republic is a long game. It'll take you like 40 hours to play through start to finish, give or take some. There are a whole lot of optional side quests, and then there's plenty of replay value on top of that. You can start the whole game over as a different type of character, picking different dialogue options, traveling with different companions, and you'll have a substantially different experience in turn as you play through the game. It's really quite impressive how much depth and how many kind of peripheral things there are in the game, and there's just no chance that you'll see everything the first time through, even though you'll see a whole lot. The game's graphics are a little bit spotty. The character models look pretty good, and you'll see them making facial expressions and stuff like that in dialogue. They try to lip sync, but it doesn't look totally convincing. But really the main issue with the graphics is that the frame rate is pretty inconsistent. It can stutter pretty noticeably during combat. And also the in-engine cutscenes that the game sometimes and thankfully not often uses to advance the storyline actually look pretty bad. They look pretty stilted and stuff like that. But generally when you're just running around and exploring the environments in the game, meeting the different characters, the game looks great. It really looks quite good, and perhaps most importantly, the lightsabers just look spot on. They look exactly like they do in the movies, and clearly the great fight scene towards the end of Star Wars Episode 1 really influenced how the lightsaber battles look in this game. On the other hand, the audio is definitely one of the highlights of Knights of the Old Republic. In particular, the speech in the game is just really well done, and there is an incredible amount of it to boot. All the dialogue in the game is in full speech. I have no idea how many hours of dialogue this must be. It's a whole lot. Again, this is a 40-hour game, much of which is spent in conversation, and then, most of that conversation you won't even hear on your first time through, since you'll get different responses out of characters depending on what you say. The aliens also speak in their native languages, though you'll start to notice that some of the alien dialogue does repeat. You'll just get an ear for it after a while and kind of maybe start to learn a bit of Wookiee or something over the course of the game. The sound effects themselves are pretty typical of Star Wars, but BioWare deserves credit for not just going with the kind of ubiquitous John Williams soundtrack for the musical score. It's great and everything, but we've all heard it a bazillion times before, and instead Knights of the Old Republic has an original musical score for the most part that sounds consistent with kind of the orchestral Star Wars sound and kind of plays quietly in the background. So it's true that you could level a few criticisms at Knights of the Old Republic and how not all the graphics look totally great, and some aspects of the story, don't seem perfectly plausible or something like that. But by and large, this game is just extremely well done and presents, about as satisfying of a Star Wars role-playing experience as you could probably imagine. There's just so much to see and to do in the game, and you truly feel a sense of freedom in having your character go about different tasks differently. You don't just have to be good or have to be evil. You could be shades of gray, and depending on how you're feeling at the time, you choose different options that best suit you. And the whole theme of the game is about how Jedi are constantly in danger of falling to the dark side, and it works out really perfectly with the gameplay that you're constantly faced with these really tempting and kind of devilish dialogue options that most games really wouldn't dare give you. Mug an old man for his money, things like that. You wouldn't expect this kind of behavior out of a Star Wars character, but this game lets you do it if you really want to. And if you're looking for a role-playing game for your Xbox, this really is an obvious choice. Likewise, if you're looking for a Star Wars game, but perhaps the best thing to be said about this game is that even if you're not or don't consider yourself to be a big fan of Star Wars or of role-playing games, that playing Knights of the Old Republic, you will more than likely appreciate this game's really obviously good qualities and just the obvious and sheer amount of effort and talent and work that went into this game. It's just really an impressive experience by and large, and is easily recommendable to anyone who has an Xbox, and even to those still on the fence on whether or not to get the system.